Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Israel's Security Cabinet is meeting now, expected to approve a full Gaza takeover as protests erupt over the fate of hostages. Trump and Putin could meet within days with a three-way Ukraine peace summit now on the table. Plus, sweeping tariffs take effect. Trump targets more than 90 countries and warns tech firms to bring production home or face a 100% import tax. Now, Israel's Security Cabinet is currently meeting to vote on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's controversial plan for a full takeover of Gaza. Reports suggest Netanyahu is likely to secure majority support for the operation. Despite criticism from some ministers, families of those held captive are staging protests near the Gaza border, calling the talks a death cabinet meeting. For more on this, I'm joined from Dusseldorf by Dr. Jamal Nazzal, Fatah Spokesman and the member of the Palestinian National Council. It's a pleasure to have you back on the show. Thank you so much for joining us. First of all, I just wanted to ask you, what consequences will Netanyahu's plan for a full military takeover of Gaza have on the country, and how concerned is Fatah?
We are very concerned that if such a plan were to be carried out, more people will be killed by the Israeli army. More people are more likely to starve and suffer from famine. The situation will be very, very difficult, far more difficult than it is now. And we now have catastrophic situations in Gaza everywhere. And Israel is only thinking of its hostages and its soldiers, the safety of its soldiers, and it's not thinking of the safety of the Palestinian civilians, who are very much on our minds.
How will Israel's full occupation of the Gaza Strip change the Palestinian political landscape?
Well, first, we are more concerned about how it will change the life of our civilians more than how it will change the political situation. Of course, legally, Israel will become officially the occupying power in Gaza, a status it has been reluctant of acquiring, because with this come more responsibility. The occupying power, according to the Fourth Geneva Convention, is responsible for the safety and the administration of the lives of the people in the lands occupied, something that Israel has not been able or willing to do. Israel keeps on doing these terrible incursions inside Gaza, and then it withdraws, then it comes in again. This results in destroying these areas. If Israel wants to stay and create an administration in Gaza, it will be responsible. But at the end of the day, Israel has to withdraw, because these are occupied territories of the state of Palestine, and it will be an illegal occupation.
So actually, Benjamin Netanyahu has been speaking about this himself, Jamal, on Fox News earlier. And he did say, we want to have a security parameter. We don't want to govern it. He says we don't want to be there as a governing body. And what he suggested is we'll hand over the territory to Arab forces that would govern it. What do you make of Israel's stance on Arab forces coming in to govern the Gaza Strip?
They are just misleading the public. I recall a famous statement from the Israeli Defense Force back on the 27th of October, when the military offensive has started. He said that this operation will last probably until January 24th. And they were preparing their audience, their public in Israel, for a very long campaign. And we know this is not about security. It's not about the hostages. It's not about destroying Hamas. It's a colonial project. It's a colonial project because Israel wants to occupy Gaza and colonize it once again. Unfortunately, they seem to have green light from the United States, and we hope this will change, because occupation is not the solution, and the military approach is the major part of the problem. It's not the solution. Israel has been trying to solve this problem militarily since 1948, and it has worsened the situation. There must be a political solution based on the terms of reference of the international legitimacy to create a Palestinian state on the borders of 1967.
So I've just heard you say there that it appears that they have the green light from the United States, the green light of full occupation. Do you think President Donald Trump should be pressuring Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu more to not occupy Gaza fully? What would you like to say to the United States right now and to President Donald Trump?
We wish for the United States of America to join the effort led by Saudi Arabia and France to recognize the state of Palestine. That will happen in September at the United Nations in New York. And we wish for the United States to put more pressure on Israel. The United States has a very large leverage on Israel. They can stop this terrible campaign by a phone call. We know that the United States have provided Israel with political cover, financing, and military machines to carry out this terrible genocide against the Palestinian people. It's time to stop, and it can only stop when the United States practices more pressure on Israel.
So, Jamal, I just want to take you back to what started this conflict, and it was that attack by Hamas on the 7th of October. The Arab League is calling on Hamas to disarm, and Al Arabiya has spoken to a senior leader of the military group. Please, can you take a listen to what he said about disarming and give your reaction?
If Israel recognized a state in exchange for Hamas disarming, would Hamas disarm?
Why should I answer hypothetical questions? Israel is denying the right of Palestinians to exist. This is the main question. You are asking the victim.
But I guess because there needs to be compromise, there needs to be a negotiation.
Yes. No. First of all, they have to create the state. As they have created the state of Israel, and they have supported it for 76 years to oppress the Palestinians, they have all the moral and political and legal duty to create the state or to help the Palestinians to have their own state.
I just wanted to ask you, Jamal, what you thought of his comments, and is it time for Hamas to disarm and for parties like yourself to be pressuring them more to come to some sort of agreement?
It's important to reiterate time and again that we as Fatah totally disapprove with the 7th of October. We disapprove and do not condone killing civilians. That is a very important thing for us to say. And it is time for Hamas to disarm, yet we do not want Hamas to give up its weapons to Israel. Hamas has to give up its weapon, to hand in its weapons to the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinian government, and to the PLO, which is the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. In fact, in my view, Hamas isn't the right address to discuss political questions with. We should discuss political questions only with the PLO and President Abbas. Hamas shouldn't be addressing the issue of the Palestinian state, especially because Hamas has, for 30 years, fought against every possibility of creating a Palestinian state. A Palestinian state was never high on the agenda of Hamas. It has done everything it can to torpedo the peace process through suicide bombings, and it has put its hands in the hands of Netanyahu to destroy every prospect of creating a Palestinian state. So Hamas is not the right party to talk about politics.
Dr. Jamal Nazzal, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for your analysis. For more on this, I'm now joined from Tel Aviv by Israeli lecturer Mordechai Kedar. Thank you so much for joining us. I don't know if you heard my previous guest there that I was just speaking to from Fatah. How realistic is Netanyahu's plan for a full Gaza takeover, both militarily and politically, given the reports of internal criticism?
No, don't get mistaken. A majority of the Israeli people do not want to have anything with Gaza. Gaza is a wasteland. Gaza is a disaster. Gaza is a swamp of problems, and a very little number of Israelis even in the government, but there's a a sliver of the Israeli people who really want to keep Gaza. Gaza is, it's nothing. Nothing attracts us to stay in Gaza. What we do have to do is to get rid of the ISIS group, which names itself Hamas, which took over Gaza with the consent of the PLO, of the PA. So this is actually what we are fighting in order to provide our people peace and tranquility, as it was until October 7th, 2023.
Doctor, you just described Gaza as a wasteland to me and said people don't want Gaza in Israel. But millions of people live in Gaza. Over 61,000 have been killed since this offensive started by Israel. People are dying of hunger. Not enough aid is getting into the country. How are Israelis feeling about that? You might say it's a wasteland, but it's where millions of people live and it's their home.
We are feeling very bad about this. We don't like it yet. We all remember what they did to us on the October 7th of 2023. How many? 1,200 Israelis were butchered by Hamas, and our girls and women were raped, and babies were burnt alive. So what do they expect? That we get them with flowers and roses? We have guns. And this is what happened. Unfortunately, this group of people in Gaza were hostages in the hands of Hamas, who couldn't care less about the people in Gaza. And unfortunately, their Arab neighbors, the Egyptians, never let them run away from this war, as many ran away from Syria, from Iraq, but not from Gaza. Why? Because the Egyptians did not open the gates for them to run away, not to Egypt, to other countries, as they did for years, from Syria and from other countries. And unfortunately, the Arab brothers of the Arabs in Gaza actually betrayed them by not allowing them to run away from Gaza.
So you just said there that the neighboring countries didn't allow the people to run away from Gaza. So what is the Israeli government's strategy for managing the humanitarian fallout if this full occupation goes ahead, particularly the evacuation and displacement of Gaza City residents during the first phase? So they're talking about occupation in the most densely populated areas within Gaza, where millions of people live.
Well, first of all, there is a very big humanitarian problem in Gaza, and this is the situation of the Israeli hostages. So far, around 20 are still alive, and we saw how hungry they are, while people in Gaza have no hunger. We give the Gazans food, as you see now on these trucks, every day, dozens, if not hundreds of trucks with food, and the Gazans do not suffer from hunger. The only ones who really suffer from the humanitarian problem is the Israeli hostages. And believe me, if Hamas released the hostages and left the Gaza Strip, the war would finish within 1 hour. But the problem is the Hamas couldn't care less about the Gazans, and the Hamas continue to fight against us. They want to keep the weapons. They want to continue to fight against us. And to repeat, October 7th, who with the right mind will leave these people, this ISIS organization named Hamas in Gaza?
So, Doctor,
who with the right mind would allow such a thing?
Doctor, I just want to ask you one question. You said if Hamas releases the hostages, the war would be over. But many people and many analysts that I have spoken to do not think that's the truth. They think the reason that Israel is continuing this offensive against Hamas and Gaza is because Benjamin Netanyahu is desperate to stay in power. He is facing a corruption trial. He is facing splits within his own cabinet. He has international warrants out from him to go to the Humanitarian Court of Justice. And the only way that he is managing to be in his position is because he is continuing with this war. What is your take on what those analysts are saying? And many believe that to be completely true.
First of all, these analysts apparently know nothing about the Israeli society. Whoever manipulates with Israeli security will be kicked out from any position, including the prime minister office, where this is total nonsense. Because first of all, his files are falling apart one by one, and this trial was a hoax, as many of the Israelis believe and see every day in this trial. However, we have when the government announced hundreds of times that we have two goals in Gaza. One is to release the hostages, and the other to get rid of Hamas as the ruling armed force. And this is what we are fighting for. In order to release the hostages, in order to keep them alive, and in order to ensure the life of Israelis around Gaza in the future. And this is what we want. And this is why I say time and again, once they release the hostages, all the hostages, and leave, means Hamas will leave the strip, the war will be finished in a minute.
Mordechai Kedar, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for your thoughts. Now, Vladimir Putin says the United Arab Emirates is a possible venue for a meeting with President Donald Trump, which the Kremlin says has now been agreed and will take place in the coming days. The Russian president has been speaking this afternoon.
Your aide, Yuri Ushakov, said the meeting was likely to be held next week. But where? Could you at least hint at this place?
We have a lot of friends that are ready to help us organize such an event. Here is one of our friends, the President of the United Arab Emirates. I think we will decide later, but this could be one of the suitable venues.
And what about Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky? Will you hold a meeting with him?
I have been repeatedly saying that I, in general, have nothing against it. This is possible, but before that, certain conditions should be created. And unfortunately, we are still far from creating such conditions.
For more on this, I'm joined from New York by John Kavulich, Senior Editor for Outcome Modelling Analysis at Issue Insight. So, John, it is looking like the UAE is basically the place that these talks will happen.
I'm not certain. President Putin, like any good host, isn't going to want to insult a guest, particularly one that's standing next to him. So it made sense for him to suggest the UAE, which does have a multi-year role in terms of facilitating dialogue between Russia and Ukraine. So it isn't completely unlikely, but I think that probably Turkey continues to have, sort of the first run, particularly because of location, and that it's held or hosted not only Russian-U.S. bilaterals, but Russian-Ukrainian bilaterals. And then finally, it's simply faster for President Putin to fly into Istanbul or Ankara and potentially President Zelensky than it is for the 5.5-hour trip from Moscow to Abu Dhabi or Dubai.
And this is the first meeting between a sitting US and Russian president, John, in more than 4 years. Could this pave the way for a ceasefire with Ukraine, or do you think it's just all for show?
There's no question that what drives President Trump is performance, and everything about him is first performative. How does it look? He goes back to his television days with NBC, with The Apprentice, and it's all about how it looks, how people look. We see him all the time saying this person's from Central Casting, how handsome this man or beautiful this woman is, how the location is amazing, lots of gold. So, for him, this is the optics. There are, on the Ukrainian side and some in the European Union will be saying, hey, this is a reward for President Putin. President Trump will be looking at it saying this is a reward for President Trump. And look at everything. I'm on a roll. Cambodia, Malaysia, India, Pakistan. And I'm not saying that any of those four countries actually believe that President Trump is responsible for ending or cessation of their conflict. But he also looks at, I recognize the president of Syria. So I'm on a real roll here. And if something comes out of it, great. But the mere fact that we're having dialogue, he will shift back and say, under the Biden administration, they weren't even talking. And now at least we're sitting across from one another and talking.
So, John, I think a lot of people are asking this question, and I actually saw it on the front of a Russian newspaper today. It was the headline. It said, Putin won, just two simple words. Has Putin won here? Because I wonder if this is what a lot of the thought pattern is. Obviously, he was iced out for so long, and now all of a sudden, like you say, he's back on the main stage with the most powerful man in the world.
You know, I would say, he never left the main stage because the Russian Federation has been stirring things up, whether positively or negatively, depending on your position, since he was removed from what was the G8 and now is the G7. But Russia's still in the G20. Russia's still a member of the United Nations, still a participant in the APEC summit. So he still is relevant. And I think their headline is correct. And I think the New York Post in New York City, which is owned by Rupert Murdoch, who controls the Wall Street Journal, Fox News, I think he would say Trump won, because both of them can say that setting foot in the room, doing the shaking of the hands, sitting next to one another, that increases both of their statures, but in different ways, and they each have different domestic audiences and particularly international audiences.
But there is one main sticking point, if reports are to be correct, that a Putin-Trump summit is conditional on the Russian president meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky. Now, how likely, John, is this?
Well, President Trump would certainly love to be able to do what Bill Clinton did with respect to Israel and the PLO, where he stood in the White House in between them both, and then encouraged Yasser Arafat and Prime Minister Rabin to have that handshake that everyone could see. And I'm sure Donald Trump would like to be in the center and basically making that handshake happen. But I don't think President Trump is going to say no to President Putin if President Putin says, look, as he has, as your setup piece showed, I'm ready to have that meeting with President Zelensky, but certain conditions need to happen. Now, for President Putin, those certain conditions are President Zelensky needs to be prepared to sign a piece of paper that gives Russia everything Russia wants. That's not likely in the cards. We may be getting there, but not likely. So I don't think that it's going to be a precondition for President Trump that President Putin meet with President Zelensky. But as long as it's open, it's a potential, President Trump can look at that as a win, saying, hey, at least I got him to agree to a meeting where before he said he didn't want to meet at all. So it's all about incremental production.
And as you said, it's all about the performance when it comes to Donald Trump, and I also think Vladimir Putin. So my final thought from you, John, is the Nobel Peace Prize going to be granted to President Donald Trump if he does make this happen? Because everyone says time and time again that that's what he's after.
Oh, it is. When you look at the Oval Office now, the way he's done it, I don't know where he would put any certificate or any award, because he's got it so full of gold lanterns and things like that. But there's no question that is what's driving him. But there are two issues there. One, the individuals that vote on the Peace Prize are no fan of Donald Trump. And so I think if Mother Teresa and Nelson Mandela were to come back from the dead and said, hey, I think he deserves it, they're still not going to give it to him. And then secondly, the reality is that thus far, and this is President Trump talking, he's saying, look at all these things I've done. Look at all these peace agreements that I presided over. but they aren't. They're portions, they're ceasefires. There's still a long way to go. And so just putting President Putin and President Zelensky physically together isn't going to get him the prize. You're going to need a peace treaty that's signed, and then they're going both the voters for the Nobel Peace Prize are then going to want to see, does it stick? Because most people believe that even if a peace treaty is signed, that it's going to be violated. So a long way for President Trump to be able to say he's received the Nobel Peace Prize, but we will continue to hear from him that he deserves the Nobel Peace Prize.
We will indeed. John Kavulich, thank you for your insights and analysis. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. Hate crime charges have been filed against the man accused of shooting to death 2 Israeli staffers in Washington in May. Elias Rodriguez has been charged with the murder of foreign officials. The hate crime charges were added after prosecutors brought the case to a grand jury. An indictment filed at a federal court seeks to pursue the death penalty for Rodriguez. United Airlines said a technology issue has led to a brief grounding of over 700 of its flights at U.S. airports on Wednesday. United's flight disruption came a few weeks after Alaska Airlines grounded all of its flights due to an IT outage for the second time in just over 1 year. And Italy has given final approval to a $15.6 billion project to build the world's longest suspension bridge that will connect the island of Sicily to the region of Calabria. The designers claim the bridge will be able to withstand earthquakes. Rome is hoping to classify the bridge as a military expense to make it count towards the NATO target of 5% of GDP spent on defense. Now it's tariff day in America as Donald Trump's sweeping import taxes take effect on over 90 countries. The US president says billions are now flowing into America, touting tariffs as a tool to bring jobs and manufacturing home. Meanwhile, President Trump is also threatening a 100% levy on foreign-made chips unless companies commit to building them in the US. For more on this, I'm joined from Bristol by economist Susannah Streeter. Susannah, a pleasure to have you on. Let's start there. President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs on more than 90 countries around the world have come into effect today. How are the markets reacting to this news?
Well, so far, certainly Wall Street seems to be shrugging off the impact of these tariffs. But remember, a lot of the valuations that are really supporting the Wall Street gains that we've seen, that's partly to do with the frenzy surrounding all things AI. And as that juggernaut continues to thunder ahead, it is keeping those valuations high. But in the background, we do have these concerns bubbling along, particularly, in so-called Main Street, real America, about the fact that these tariffs are going to lead to higher prices for American consumers. And at the moment, I don't think this is being fully factored in. There are expectations that the US economy is slowing. Of course, we had that volatility at the end of last week as the labour market data showed that the jobs market is weakening more quickly than expected. So I do think actually that there could be even more volatility ahead as the bigger implications of Trump's tariff wars become clear.
Yes, indeed. And Susannah, India, Canada and Brazil are a few of the countries with these punishingly high tariffs. Are negotiating teams scrambling around to fix this? And what impact will these levies have on their economies?
Well, yes, they are, but whether or not they have that much success really does remain to be seen. Of course, there was all this talk about the taco trade. Trump always chickens out, but certainly now with these tariffs coming into effect, it doesn't look like that is the case. Of course, he has retreated from some of the more onerous tariffs. However, they are still scorchingly high for these nations. There will be hopes that there will be more room for negotiation. Look at India, for example. The threatened tariffs there are linked to India buying Russian oil. Trump wants to see, has been discussing a resolution to the war in Ukraine. And these reciprocal tariffs are being used as a way for Trump to gain ground in foreign policy. And we've seen with immigration, we've seen with drug policy as well. Trade is being used really for in all sorts of spheres. At the moment, it's being used in the kind of geopolitical sphere to try and get Moscow to agree to a ceasefire. So if that happens, perhaps the most onerous tariffs on India will not arrive, but there is a lot of uncertainty around. There is defiance as well elsewhere. Some nations are simply saying they will form coalitions with other willing nations to try and counter the Trump tariff threats. And we are seeing some resilience. China, for example, its export figures were released today, the latest figures, and they show that actually exports rose. They're resilient because China has been getting used to this tariff environment for a while and is creating new trading partnerships elsewhere. So bit by bit, these kind of tentacles will extend out, and those nations that are currently shut out in the cold will try and make new friendlier trading partners elsewhere.
And I just want to move on to another topic. Today, we saw the BOE cut interest today over in the UK. Interest rates are lower, even though, you know, inflation's not at the BOE's target, and we know that. But I did note that Andrew Bailey, the governor of the Bank of England, actually mentioned Jerome Powell and said he was doing a good job. Can we see correlations at all between, you know, the BOE cutting rates and the Bank of America in the future? Because we know Donald Trump has been so frustrated with Jerome Powell.
Yes, certainly. And that frustration has been plain to see. So the Federal Reserve has certainly been cautious in its approach to cutting interest rates. And you are seeing more caution creeping at the Bank of England. Policymakers did vote, for the majority did vote for an interest rate cut, but it was split 5-4 because there are plenty around the table who are still worried about hot inflation. It's running at around 3.7%, due to rise 4% in September. That's double the Bank of England's target. And that's why they continue to be concerned. And those same concerns are bubbling in the United States. Of course, the UK isn't going to be hit with the same types of inflationary pressures induced by tariffs as there will be in the United States. But nevertheless, it has been facing this problem of obstinate inflation. It does look as though disinflationary forces are creeping in. We've got a rise in the unemployment rate here in the UK. The economy has gone into reverse slightly. And the bank will be hoping that this interest rate cut might do the job to help warm up the economy, but not set off inflation again. In the United States, I still think there's going to be a lot more wariness as the full extent of Trump's tariffs play out.
I was meant to say the Federal Reserve there, not the Bank of America. Susannah Streeter, thank you so much for joining us. A pleasure to have you on the show and your thoughts and insights. Markets across Asia reacted to the prospect of further tariffs, but quickly recovered, with even the Indian Stock Exchange closing in the green. But the upheaval may not be over. US President Donald Trump has said he is considering imposing tariffs of 100% on semiconductors. The only exception would be firms that manufacture them in the US. Camille Nedelec is in Hong Kong with this recap on what's moved markets in Asia today.
Stock markets across Asia reacted but didn't panic, and that even extends to India's Nifty 50. India could be facing tariffs of up to 50% in the coming weeks, and that is in retaliation for its purchase of sanctioned Russian oil. US President Donald Trump also said that China might come in for a tariffs hike over its refusal to adhere to US sanctions. China has continued to buy sanctioned oil from Russia and also Iran. Another thing the markets have been reacting to is this threat of 100% tariffs on semiconductors. While South Korea has said it doesn't believe that it will be impacted because it already has a deal with Washington and it is getting those preferential rates that it had negotiated on its semiconductors. Other countries, such as the Philippines, are really very worried about this. The head of the Semiconductor Association there said that tariffs of 100% on Philippine semiconductor products would be devastating. And this is all part of a drive on behalf of Washington to force companies to relocate production and manufacturing back in the United States. It wants to reshore manufacturing capabilities. It wants those supply chains to be at home. In 1990, the United States manufactured something like 40% of the world's semiconductors, and last year that was just 12%. The issue is, though, that whilst the president does release these edicts and these warnings, there is very little detail. We don't know how much the companies would have to invest in the United States to be able to escape those 100% tariffs. We don't know how many jobs they would have to create. There just isn't enough to know who would come under this new regime if it indeed does come into force.
Let's take a look at the top business news now. Apple plans to boost investment by another $100 billion in the US amid pressure from the Trump administration. It adds to a previous $500 billion pledge over 4 years. The White House says the money would be used to encourage firms to make more Apple parts in the US. CEO Tim Cook presented President Trump with a glass statue during the formal announcement. Now, teen accessories retailer Claire's has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy for the second time since 2018. The store is supposedly struggling with a big debt load and changing consumer taste. Claire's, which was founded all the way back in 1974, operates thousands of stores across 17 countries. Turning to all the sports news now, and Canadian tennis star Victoria Mboko will face Naomi Osaka after defying all the odds in a match against former Wimbledon champion Elena Rybakina. Despite losing the first set, the 18-year-old came out on top with a stunning comeback at the final of the Canadian Open. And staying with tennis, the US Open is set to offer the largest prize money in tennis history with a whopping $90 million. It marks a 20% increase from last year's sum of $75 million. The men's and women's singles champions will earn $5 million each. A reminder of our top stories. Israel's Security Cabinet is meeting now, expected to approve a full Gaza takeover as protests erupt over the fate of hostages. Trump and Putin could meet within days, with a three-way Ukraine peace summit now on the table. Plus, sweeping tariffs take effect. Trump targets more than 90 countries and warns tech firms to bring production home or face a 100% import tax. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on X. The Real Deal with Tom Burgess-Watson is coming up next. Plus, we'll be back in just a couple of hours' time with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you for joining us.